Morning, and thank you very much for joining us for this webcast from the Seated Human. Just a small practical piece of information about sitting of the screen. If you are not able to see the entirety of the text box on the screen in front of you, then probably the resolution of your computer monitor doesn't fit the resolution of my computer monitor. And the fix to that is to go to the little WebEx menu that you have in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you click that menu, you will find that there is a part of it called View, and inside that you find a menu called Auto Fit. And if you pick that menu, your computer screen will be set up to fit mine. My name is John Rasmussen, and in a few seconds you should be able to see me in a picture on the left-hand side of your screen. And in the middle you see our host, Arne Kies from Anybody Technology. And Anybody Technology is sponsoring this event, so they're actually paying the bill for transmitting the signal. In addition, we have in the back office Mark Bazet and Søren Tørholm, who are acting as panelists, and they will be available to answer questions as we go along. And concerning questions, we have a nice feature in this WebEx mechanism that we're using to transmit the webcast. It's a question and answers panel. If you click the little question mark in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, I think it should be, you can see the little question mark here. Let me just switch on my pointer. So there's a little question mark here that you can click. And when you click that question mark, you will question and answers panel will open up and allow you to type in a question. And you can type in this question at any time during a webcast. And this is one of the advantages of webcasts compared to normal presentations. So if you have any question as we go along, don't hesitate to type the question into the question and answers panel. Before you submit the question, by hitting the send button over here, this is the send button. So before you actually click that button, please make sure that you elect to send the question to host, presenter, and panelists. That way we can make sure that the question will go to our question and answers, to our panelists in the back office. We may elect to save some of the questions for the end of the session, where we will have a part of the presentation where I will attempt to answer questions of a more general nature orally here on the microphone. And then, just for the benefit of those who may not have been able to get the sound, I will just leave this slide up for a few seconds. Those of you who already figured out how to get the sound, I apologize for the delay, but it turns out that for many people it's difficult to figure out how to set up their computers to get the sound. So we'll just leave this up for a few seconds, and I thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have divided this webcast into three nice little easy parts. The first part is about the seated human model, which is a model we have developed, which is of a person sitting in a generic chair. The origin of this project is a cooperation that the Anybody Research Project has with the local furniture industry. Two companies, RDM and AP Furniture. We are very grateful for the support for this research that these two companies have provided. As I said, it's a model of musculoskeletal human sitting in a generic chair. And by generic, I mean that the chair is adjustable, such that you can put it into various different positions. You can incline the seat and back and forth, and you can incline the backrest back and forth, and you can adjust the positions of the armrests, and indeed you can remove the armrests altogether. We can also play around with the friction and the position of the footrest and the positions of the leg rests. So in fact, this chair is capable of becoming everything from a high stool that you can use, that, for instance, hairdressers or dentists are using when they're working, and right down to an incliner, a very inclined chair, actually all the way to the chair of actually becoming a bed. And the reason why we have developed this model? Because we want to exploit the possibility of using our musculoskeletal models for the purposes of investigating the biomechanics of sitting. And you know that people are spending an increasing amount of time in seated postures, and this phenomenon has been suspected of being one of the causes of the increase of the frequency of back pain in the general population. So there are many theories that are concerning that the special load that the chair is, or the seated posture is putting on the human spine may be responsible for some of these problems. And the furniture companies who are going into this, of course, are interested in figuring out ways to make better chairs. And of course, the first precondition of being able to make a better product is to understand the mechanics of the whole situation. And this is what we can do with the seated human model. Now, some of you may have seen this picture before. This is a picture that shows how we actually build models. We always put our models together by means of two different parts. The part on the left is the model repository, in which we have stored very detailed musculoskeletal models of the different body parts, and indeed the entire human. And so when we want to make a new model, we just draw upon the model repository and we grab the elements from there and we put them into our model. And then the user contribution to building the model is actually to build the environment. The environment in the example you see here would be the interior of a car, and in the seated human, of course, this would be represented just by the chair. Obviously, the environment is usually much more simple than the human body, so most of the work has been done already by developing the model library. You could also say that the body parts in the model library are scalable, so you can actually scale them to different sizes of people, to men and women and different populations. The way that you scale them is you must obtain knowledge about the segment length and mass of each individual segment, and then you put that into the model, and the model automatically scales to fit that. Just a few words about some of the important parts of the model repository for this application. First and foremost, there's the spine model. And right now, the model is focusing on the lumbar spine. This lumbar spine model is modeled to a very great detail. It has just in the spinal part, it has 158 muscles. And this model has been developed in a research project by Mark Bazé, who is one of our panelists today, and Lone Hansen from the University of Copenhagen. And we do not currently in the model have thoracic and cervical parts. So the thoracic part in this model, that's the part that you see here, part would be the thoracic part. That part is currently rigid in the model, and the only muscles that are attaching here are the muscles from the shoulder and the muscles that come from the lumbar part. Furthermore, the neck is not in the model at the moment, so the cervical part that you see here is also rigid. The only muscles that are attaching there are the muscles that come from the shoulder, primarily, of course, the trapezius muscles that you can see here. However, we are right now developing the thoracic and cervical parts of the spine, and I'll get back to that in a little more detail towards the end of the presentation. One interesting part of the spine model is that we also have a quite detailed abdominal model that comprises the rectus and obliquus and the transversus muscles. The interesting part of this abdominal model is that it also contains an abdominal pressure. This is implemented as a sort of a balloon, which is embedded inside the abdomen. And this balloon, which is actually cylindrical in shape, is being squeezed on by the transversus muscles. And when the balloon is incompressible, so when the transversus muscles are squeezing the balloon from the side, it means that the balloon will extend upwards and downwards, and it will be pressing on the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, and that way it generates an extension moment in the spine. So the model has the capability of supporting the spinal extension by the abdominal pressure as it happens in reality. Also, the lower extremity model is actually the simplest body part that we have in the library. It contains a rigid foot and a shank, which just as the tibia, we are not modeling the fibula in this model, just as people usually don't do in musculoskeletal models. And then we have the femur, and of course we have the pelvis, and we have the various joints that go between these. I should say that the knee joint that we have in the model right now is a simple hinge joint. We have made some investigations, actually quite a lot of investigations of this joint, and for moderate flexion angles, we get muscle nomadowns over the knee joint that are very close to reality. So it doesn't matter very much that we are making this simplification for the model in question. It's only if we do very high levels of knee flexion that the difference between the real knee and the one that we have here becomes prevalent. We have around 40 muscles in each leg, and some of this has been developed by Mark Thompson, to whom we are very grateful that we continue to improve this model as we do with all our musculoskeletal models. Finally, in this method section, I would say just a few words about the way we are recruiting muscles. This is inverse dynamics, and the usual way of recruiting muscles in inverse dynamics is by means of an optimality criterion. This is also what we do. We have in the equations you see here, we have stated down here the equilibrium equations of the musculoskeletal system. Now, these equations are insufficient to determine all the muscle forces. So, in fact, in these equations, we have more unknowns than we have equations. So we have infinitely many solutions to the problem. Furthermore, we have the condition that muscles can only push. So we have a condition here that the muscle forces must be positive. Still, when taking that into account, we typically have infinitely many solutions to the problem. So we furthermore augment this problem by an objective function, which is the one you see up here. And this objective function, or cost function, is the one that we are presuming that the body is trying to minimize by recruitment of the muscles. So the question is, what choice should we use for this objective function? The choice that we are having in the analysis that you are going to see here is that we are using what we could interpret as a minimum fatigue criterion. So what we do is we take all of the muscle forces, the individual muscle forces here are called Fi, and those we normalize by the strength of each muscle. This normalization factor is called Ni, and so we are minimizing the maximum of those terms over all of the I's in the system, meaning that if any muscle has a relatively higher load than any of the other muscles, then the other muscles will try to come to assistance by working a little bit more and then reducing the load on the muscle that has the highest load. This has the consequence that many of the muscles will end up having the same activity. And this active state of these muscles we call the maximum muscle activity, or the muscle recruitment envelope. And in fact, this recruitment envelope is very important for ergonomic investigations because it is equivalent to the perceived effort of doing the task. So this actually comes out as a percentage of maximum voluntary contraction. And by means of this percentage, we can evaluate the difficulty or lightness of doing different work tasks, like, for instance, sitting in a chair. I'll get back to this maximum muscle activity a little bit later when we look at the results. So this is the maximum muscle activity is the objective function of this minimum fatigue formulation. Okay, so I'll go to a brief demonstration of the model. So I'll just briefly shut down my PowerPoint presentation and open up the Anybody modeling system. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type them into the question and answers panel. So here we have the model of our seated human. I can twist it around a little bit and you can see that it has a high level of detail. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run an analysis, which in this case is just a static posture, so it's just one time step. And you will notice when I start the analysis that the posture of the person and the chair is going to change. The posture that you see here is simply the position in which the model is loaded in, and when it resolves the kinematic equations, it's going to change its posture according to the specifications that we have made in the model. And this posture is what is adjustable in the model and what we can change. So we're going to do an analysis first of one posture that has a 5-degree backward inclination of the seat. When the analysis of this time step is completed, you will see that the muscles are bulging up as a response to the activity in each muscle. I have vastly exaggerated the bulging of the muscles here to make it easier to see what's happening. The actual muscle activity that we're going to come out with is only going to be between 3 and 4%. So it's a very, very sub-maximal activity to sit in a chair like this. In fact, the guy here is sitting pretty comfortably as he's sitting now. So you can see in this picture, you can see the bulging of the muscles, and you can see how the seat is inclined 5 degrees backwards. And you can also see the blue arrows are the reaction forces between the chair and the body, and these are computed automatically by the model. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take a look at the maximum muscle activity. And the easiest way to do that is simply to find the number in the data structure. I can double-click the number. Down here at the bottom, you can see that currently the maximum muscle activity is only about 3.7%. So this is not very much. We could also take a look at the forces in the system. So I could open up the actual human model, and I could find inside the human model, I can find a variable that contains the reaction force between L5 and the sacrum. And when I click that, you can see here down at the bottom that currently the force between L5 and the sacrum is 416 Newton. So let us try to do something else. Let us try to incline the seat forward instead of having it inclined backwards. What I'll do is I will go into the specifications in the model, and then I will change this variable that you see. This one is the specification of the backward inclination of 5 degrees of the seat. I'm going to change that to a forward inclination instead. This is done simply by removing the minus sign. Just a few seconds, you will see pretty much the same picture as we saw before in terms of muscle activity. But there is a bit of difference, which we will see when we study the results in more detail. So now the analysis is done. I can look at the maximum muscle activity, and it went up from 3-point-something to 4.6%. So obviously it seems that we have a bigger muscle activity when we're inclining the seat forward. And I think this bigger muscle activity is primarily in the thigh muscles, because the thigh muscles are right now preventing the person from sliding down the seat. If we look again at the value of the reaction force between L5 and sacrum, plot that, and you can see that this is now 379 newtons, so this is actually a little less than it was before. So it seems like inclining the seat forward is reducing the load on the spine, but increasing the load on the leg muscles. So this is actually the whole topic of what we're going to talk about today. But before we leave the model, let me just draw your attention to the fact that in the model we can change all sorts of stuff about the chair position. We can do that in this block that you see here, where we can individually change different the positions of different parts of the chair, and the body is going to follow. And we have another place in the model where we can also change friction quantities of the contact between the human body and the seat. So I'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation again, and the second part of the presentation is now the kinds of investigations that we can do with this model. The investigations that we have made, which we think is pretty interesting, is one of those dogmas that tend to haunt the design of chairs. It turns out that there was a claim made by a scientist called Mendel back in the 80s that if you were able to reduce the flexion angle between your thorax and your thighs, which is distributed between the hips and the lumbar spine, then you would be able to reduce the load on your spine in the seated posture. And so this was supposed to be good for your back. Claim was not made based on a detailed computational model like the one that we have here, but only based on some very simple mechanical considerations. But they had a lot of impact in the furniture industry, at least in the part of the world where we come from. They caused many of the furniture companies to enable the seats on the chairs to be able to incline forward, although there wasn't actually ever made a proper investigation of the validity of this claim. So it just became a sort of a dogma that if you incline the seat forward, then it is going to be good for your back. And so all the furniture manufacturers started to make seats like that, but the problem was that the users actually did not like those seats. And the question that we are asking here is, could we use the model to figure out whether it actually is a good idea to incline the seat forward? Under which circumstances would it be a good idea to do so? So one of the issues that I already mentioned is that if you incline the seat forward, then you are prone to sliding down the seat while you're sitting. This may not seem like a very big tendency if you look at moderate inclination angles like the one that you see here. But please notice, if you look at the horizontal equilibrium of forces in a system like this, then you would want to lean against the backrest. And this means that because of Newton's third law, it means that the backrest is going to apply forces to your back. It's going to push you horizontally to the right in the picture that you see here. So this pushing horizontally to the right can only be taken up by the pelvis and thigh contact with the seat, or with the foot contact with the floor. And so it turns out that because we want to use the backrest, it can be difficult to stay in a seat which is inclining forward, even if this inclination is only moderate. Of course, it also depends on the friction. If the seat has a high friction, then you will not slide, but there will be some amount of shear force on your thighs, which may or may not be uncomfortable. And so what we're going to investigate here is two things. We're going to look at the different combinations between friction and inclination of the seat. And we're going to incline the seat forward and backwards to various degrees, and we're also going to systematically vary the friction coefficient between the human and the chair. And at the same time, we will investigate the maximum muscle activity, so the effort, the perceived effort of staying in the seat, and we will also investigate the forces between in the lumbar spine between the L5 and the sacrum, as we saw before. So if we set up our model to do such a systematic variation of the friction coefficient against the seat inclination, then you can get a surface that looks like this. This takes a little bit of explanation to understand. Please notice in these doses initially that we have in this part, we have of the first axis, we have the high friction, and here we have the low friction. When we move this way on the first axis, we're going to increase the friction coefficient. Also, in terms of the tilt of the seat, we have here a backward tilting seat, and here we have a forward tilting seat. So this direction on the second axis is tilting the seat forward. And then finally, up the value axis here, we have the maximum muscle activity. So this can be equivalent to the fatigue that you will be feeling, or perhaps the effort that you will be perceiving when you're sitting in the seat. So a low value of the surface here is going to signify a comfortable seating position in the sense that you will not be using much of your muscle force to stay in the seat. So it's very easy to see that the comfortable part of this surface is the one that you see in this area. This is the combination of a high friction and a backward tilting seat. And probably, or obviously, the reason why this is so is because that if the seat is tilting backwards, then you are being pushed against the backrest, so you can take advantage of the backrest without having to be afraid of sliding forward on the seat. So this is actually the most relaxed position that you can find. If, on the contrary, if we look at the opposite combination, namely the combination of a slippery seat with low friction coefficient and a forward tilting seat, then we will end up in the other end of the surface. We will end up here, and you can see that this is the combination that will give you the highest muscle activity that you can get. So in this case, you will experience more fatigue or perceive a higher effort when you're sitting in the seat. So this is all very much as we could expect, I think. Now let us look at the second property, namely the property of the forces between the L5 and the sacrum. And this was what Mandel was claiming would be reduced by a forward tilting seat. And it actually turns out that according to the model, Mandel was right. Because if we find the place in this on this surface that gives you the smallest value of the force between the L5 and the sacrum, then you can see that this occurs in this area of the parameter combinations. And here we have, in order to make it easier to see the surface, we have swapped the two axes. So here on this axis we have the seat inclination angle, and we have the forward inclining seat in this direction. So you can see that the absolute minimum value of the seat inclination is around here, which is about a 10-degree forward inclining seat. And that is what, according to the model, is going to give you the smallest value of the reaction force between L5 and the sacrum. Notice also another thing. If we look at the other axis, the one over here, you can see that the direction of high friction is in this direction. And you can see on the surface that higher friction tends to give you a higher force in between the L5 and the sacrum. So in fact, a low friction seems to be, a slippery seat seems to be the most beneficial in terms of reducing the forces between the spinal vertebrae. So the combination here of a forward tilting seat and the low friction seems to be the best in terms of reducing the load on the spine. If you remember the results from the previous slide, maybe you remember that this combination was unfortunately the one that would give you the highest muscle activity, because this would make you tend to slide down the seat and probably be uncomfortable in the long run. So it looks like in this case that there is a discrepancy between the desire to reduce the loads on the spine and the desire to sit comfortably and be as relaxed as possible while you're seated. And we haven't got a really good solution to this, but we can only observe that it seems that Mandel was right in his claim that it's a good idea to tilt the seat forward. However, it may not be comfortable to sit on a seat like that because it requires more muscle activity and therefore will give you more fatigue. So I already made these observations. I would just add one more observation, that if we look at what actual spinal reactions we have I can actually just go back to the previous slide again. We look at the actual sizes of these spinal reactions. They're only in the maximum around 480 Newton, which is not very much. If you compare the 480 Newton we have between the spinal vertebra here with the situation of, for instance, lifting something, then you would get in the lifting situation a much higher force in the spine. So these are very moderate forces compared to what we have in other situations. So the third part of the presentation is conclusions and outlook. And so one conclusion is that using this type of model, we can investigate a whole lot of relevant issues, such as spinal loads, as we have done here. We can look at shoulder loads. We know that lots of people who are working in seated postures, typically office workers or assembly line workers, they have a lot of trouble with soreness or pain from the shoulder muscles. So the shoulder loads are interesting. When we did this project, we had a special interest group of clinicians who were following the project and the development of the project. These were people who were working professionally with seating, and what they told us was that actually it seems that many of the problems that they're seeing in practice with office workers in particularly are rooted in the head posture. So they get a lot of responses that seem to be connected with a disadvantaged position of the head in the working posture. So one of the things that they were asking for was whether it would be possible to make a neck model and then also conduct an investigation of how the neck and the head are performing in the seated posture. And so lots of people actually do experience neck and shoulder problems because of the seated posture. This also leads to other problems such as chronic headaches and stuff like that. And I'm sure all of you guys know people who are having those symptoms. So it's actually something which is really, really common in office workers. And it's a big socio-economic problem. So it would be nice to get to the bottom of that and figure out what's going on here. So why is the neck prone to developing pain? Well, the thing is that our heads are comparatively heavy. If you see this lovely little baby here, you can see that the size of the head compared to the body is rather large. And of course, those proportions are extreme in babies. But even in adults, we have rather heavy heads. And so the muscles in the cervical spine have the constant task of balancing the heads on the top of our bodies. And depending on the posture of the head in the seated posture, you may have more or less loads on those muscles and also on the vertebra in the neck. Therefore, you can, if you have the wrong posture of the head, it's very likely that those muscles could be fatigued, and this can then develop infiltrations, and they can give you headaches and so on. So we've been looking into development of a neck model, and actually this is work that is ongoing right at the moment. We can observe that the neck, just like the lumbar spine, is a very complex mechanical system. You can see some pictures here from an anatomical atlas. So you can see some of the complexity of the muscles in the neck. If we look at the segments of the neck, which are the cervical vertebra, then they're quite interesting in the way that they're built up. Especially the two top vertebrae, the atlas and the axis, the C1 and C2, they have quite specialized functions, so that the atlas provides the flexion of the neck, the flexion and extension movement, and the axis has this little tip, this little bony tip that goes into the atlas and provides, between those two, they provide the ability to rotate the neck. So there's a lot of quite interesting kinematics going on in the neck, which we have to model quite carefully. Also, the muscle configuration is fairly complicated. We need approximately 140 muscles just in the neck in order to make a reasonable model of that. You can see in this picture the current state of that model. We have actually added all of those muscles, and we are currently in the process of connecting those muscles and the neck model with the rest of the body repository. All those muscles and the necessity of being able to use the neck model alone and also together with the rest of the body, it becomes quite a management task to figure out how we can hook the whole thing up and also enable the user to take it apart in an easy way afterwards. So we are currently working on that, and the NEG model will come out in a later version of the model repository. Once it is finished, we're going to use it to investigate seated postures and working postures like these. Typically that would be work that is being done with computer monitors, or maybe with drawing boards, or maybe just working with pen and paper at a desk. And you can see in these three pictures that you get quite different head postures in those three different situations. And obviously this is going to mechanically be very different for the neck muscles. So that was the conclusions and the outlook, and at the end of this I would just point you to some online resources that you can go to learn more about this. On Anybody Technologies homepage, where you have already gone to sign up for this webcast, you can get free demo licenses for the software. You can find tutorials and documentation for the software, and you can also replay the webcasts that we have done previously. This webcast will also be available for replay at a later time. You can also go to the homepage of the Anybody Research Project. This is anybody.aau.dk, and here you can find the model repository, the public domain library of body models and applications. And this library also includes the seated human. I should say that we're expecting to update this quite soon. We have a new version of the model library coming out. It will include several updates. Unfortunately, the neck model will not be included yet in this release, but we hope that it will come in an imminent future release of the repository. You can also, from the publication list, download a lot of the publications that we have written, where you can read much more about the technicalities of the technology that I have shown here. And then I would like to draw your attention to some forthcoming webcasts we have on December 4. Mark Desai will come and talk about about the lumbar spine model in more detail. The development of that, I already introduced it briefly here, but Mark can say much more about it. He was the main figure in developing this model. On the 17th of January, we are going to we're going to have a guest speaker, Professor Kenneth Meyer from the University of Maastricht and the University of Eindhoven. He has a shared position, and he's going to come and talk about how to scale the strength in human simulations like the ones that we have been doing here. They're doing some very, very interesting work where they are measuring the strength of different people depending on their anthropometrical measurements. And he can show that we can come up with a very accurate scaling based on the basic data for these people. Of course, the implications of this is that we will, in the future, we will be able to do a very accurate scaling of musculoskeletal models so that we can accurately predict the strength of people in different situations. And then the 22nd of February, we're going to have a webcast by Michael Skipper Anderson, who is currently developing an interface to motion capture technology from Anybody. And the title of his presentation is Kinematic Analysis of Overdeterminate Systems. And the issue here is, of course, that when you do the mocap experiment, you typically get much more kinematical information than you can actually impose on the model. And the question is then, what can we do in order to utilize this information? Finally, we are coming to the question and